Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features Uncanny X-Men number 270, cover dated November 1990. And this is part one of the X-Tinction Agenda, a 3-month crossover between Uncanny X-Men, New Mutants and X-Factor. The cover caption, First Strike, the cover itself drawn by Jim Lee, penciled by Jim Lee and inked by Scott Williams. I've always really liked this cover. I like the design. We've got this kind of triangular type effect. Havok there launching his plasma blast straight up into the sky, but hitting the X-Men logo and tumbling it around. Really good stuff. And in the background we get our first glimpse of Jim Lee's designs for Genoshan tech. So we've got these cool kind of monocycle walker units that the Genoshan magistrates are using there, and we'll find out what they're up to inside this issue itself. Also noteworthy is that Storm, D-Age Storm, features on this cover too, and she has obviously been bested by Havok, their former teammates going back to the Outback era. And we also have Boom Boom on the cover and Warlock as well. So little mysteries there in terms of what is going on in this particular issue, seeded there on the cover. Now you can see I've got two versions of the comic on screen for you. The second one here on the right is the reprint, and you can see that Marvel did a reprint of our second printing of issue 270. I mean, it's part one of this crossover, so obviously there would have been a lot of demand for this, but with a gold ink on the background. So just so you can get a little look at that. But this is the issue, the copy that I am going to use for the review here. So let's open this one up to the first page. Now there's a lot of text on this page, and we have our introduction. Remember, Chris Claremont, a drama major. We have him referring to the terminology of the dramatis personae. So the actors here, Gambit, Banshee, Forge, Storm, and Marvel Girl. And down here, the New Mutants, Boom Boom, Cannonball, Sunspot, Cable, Warlock, Wolfsbane, and Richter. And in the middle, we have 4 panels with Trish Tilby, who is a news anchor for WARC TV, and also the girlfriend of X-Factor member Beast, aka Henry McCoy. And this is our context for what happens in the issue, and it refers to things that have been building up in previous issues of the title. Relations between the United States and the East African island Republic of Genosha remain strained, says Trish, with the Genoshan government refusing to back down from its stated policy of taking whatever steps prove necessary to bring so-called mutant terrorists to justice. So we get an inset of a Genoshan newscaster talking from her perspective. And interesting to see here that Jim Lee is homaging Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. So, of course, in Dark Knight Returns, there's a series of newscasters featured in the television screen sections of the comic, and you can see there that Jim Lee is homaging this particular newscaster here for the Genoshan one in X-Tinction Agenda. But she says, in any case, we're a sovereign state with the same right to protect itself and its citizenry as any other nation. These X-Men, however highly they may be regarded elsewhere, have committed acts of aggression and made threats we cannot and will not ignore. Of course, we would prefer to have the cooperation of others, especially such a valued ally as the United States, but should circumstances require, in order to safeguard our people, we are more than ready to act alone. And what we see here in this particular image is X-Factor's headquarters ship, this huge spaceship skyscraper that was sitting in the middle of Midtown Manhattan in this particular era. And you can see that this basically means that X-Factor are listening to this same newscast as well, so they're getting the information too. And then back to Trish Tilby, and she says, she concludes, what those actions may be, the Genoshans will not say. In Washington, the administration had no further comment. All attempts to contact the mutant team X-Factor for their view of this developing situation have likewise proved fruitless. So X-Factor not making any kind of statement at present. So Claremont really giving a good specificity to the kind of geopolitical background to what happens in this particular issue. And of course, Janosha introduced into the X-Men comics back with issues 235 to 238. Janosha is a nation that is institutionally, politically, judicially racist and uses mutants as a slave labor force. So that's who that country is. The title of this particular chapter of X-Tinction Agenda, First Strike. And we get this great double page spread here of Marvel Girl, aka Jean Grey, going up against Storm. And remember, in this era, Marvel Girl or Jean did not have her telepathic powers back. She's just got her telekinesis. And Storm is de-aged thanks to Nanny and the aftermath of events of Uncanny X-Men 248. Jim Lee's first on the title. So this is Storm in the body of more or less a 12-year-old. But she does have access to her mutant powers, but not the access or level of power that she had when she was in her adult body. So these two old friends are sparring in the danger room, and you can see the background that Jim Lee has drawn in. It's like a wrecked urban environment, and they're really not holding back against each other. So Jean says to Storm, "The thunderstorm you're manifesting is very impressive, but I think a focused TK shot to the solar plexus," and we can see the outcome of that might prove a trifle more effective, says Jean. Really like this this tight 3/4 profile angle on Jean's face here, nicely drawn by Jim Lee. And you can see him in this issue trying out new poses. His style hasn't 100% solidified. He is developing all the time and trying out new things on pretty much every page, and that's an exciting phase of any artist's development. So Jean also uses her TK here to ensnare Storm so that she stays put, and asks Storm whether she's going to concede the match. And then we get a view up to the control room, and in the control room we've got Banshee, Forge and Stevie Hunter. And Banshee says, "Scanners confirm the evidence of our own eyes. Jean's as good as ever she was, and I'll wager perhaps a fair bit better." And Forge says, "It isn't exactly a fair fight, Banshee. A grown-up against a kid." And Banshee concludes, "Aye, but that's the purpose of the exercise, Forge, to evaluate the extent and capabilities of Storm's powers. Physiologically, she's barely an adolescent, her mutant talent in its initial manifestation." So despite all of that, Storm is crafty. She has her adult mind back from the end of issue 267, and she has obviously and evidently made her way to the X-Mansion between that issue and this one. And really their arrival, Storm and Gambit's arrival to the X-Mansion, is told in X-Men, Uncanny X-Men Annual number 14. You'll find a review of that on the channel. So Sneaky Storm whips up some ice. The air freezes around Jean, and Storm basically uses her elemental power in order to produce a gust of wind that knocks Jean along the icy ledge and over the side. So good stuff. Despite Storm being in the body of a 12-year-old, she's holding her own against Marvel Girl. And she says to her, "A disadvantage of telekinesis is that you need to focus your concentration to use it. I no longer intend to allow you that opportunity." So Forge says, "You were saying, pal," he's saying that to Stevie Hunter, "credit where credit's due, Forge. That witch, Nanny, may have regressed Storm's body to childhood, but mentally she's lost none of her skill or intelligence, and I suspect she's grown a whole lot sneakier. Probably the influence of that so-called partner of hers, Gambit." So like I said, the last time that we saw them in the title was issue 267, when Storm, having got her adult mind and memories back, told Gambit that they were going to go find the X-Men. I hate to burst your collective congratulative bubble, boys, says Stevie, but you're missing the point. As you yourself said, Banshee, physically, she's a youngster. Her body's still growing. Too much of the wrong kind of stress, like pushing her elemental powers beyond their limit. And I like this. This is a funny editorial footnote here. Last seen in Even We Can't Remember. So Stevie Hunter was Kitty Pryde's dance teacher. So really the last issues in which Stevie appeared would have been the Paul Smith era, at least of the X-Men title, according to my memory. And Stevie continues and says, could cause permanent injury. So Forge says, I think Miss Hunter, Storm's well aware of her limitations. And then on screen is Richter, and he is requesting access to the Danger Room because in this time period, while the X-Men were presumed dead and operating clandestinely from their outback headquarters in Australia, the New Mutants were the residents of the X-Mansion and users of the Danger Room for their training sessions. Stevie continues, making her point, adult knowledge, Forge, of an adult instrument, but her current reality is that of a child. And Banshee responds to Richter there, we're running an evaluation sequence, lad. I'm sorry, but you'll have to wait. And he's miffed. He says, hey, sure, why not? No problem. I mean, it's only our house. And we're going to get a development of that debate between the newly re-arrived X-Men and Cable shortly. So Stevie shuts down the training sequence because she's insistent that Storm's body hasn't the resources to handle the kind of load that she's exerting in the Danger Room. She's losing control, says Stevie. The two lads here were fully prepared to let the sequence continue as it was. And it turns out that Stevie's right, that Storm has overexerted herself and she's lost control of her powers and she's falling to the ground. Banshee says, Stevie, there was no need to cancel the session. And Stevie says there was every need. Trust me, Sean. Professor Xavier made me responsible for the physical conditioning of the students. I know when they've pushed themselves past the point of exhaustion. And so she's falling. But how did she get down from the control booth so quickly? You see, from here up in the control booth all the way down there. It's a little issue there with the pacing in Lee's storytelling, but it's not really a major error. And then Jean, of course, catches Storm with her telekinesis in order to prevent her from hitting the floor hard and gives her a lift down to the floor. Stevie says, how many times do I have to read you the riot act, Storm, before you listen? You want to be like those babies on the pro tennis tour. Champions one year, has-beens the next, because their still developing bodies couldn't hack the strain. And Storm says, this is not a game, Stevie. All the more reason to take care. All those kids risk is a career. You could lose your life, says Stevie. So, of course, she's thinking about, the potential real-world outcomes of Storm in that 12-year-old body not being able to act the way she would when she was in her adult body. And then all of this is interrupted by the rude arrival of Cable, and that's such a great shot of him kicking in the door of the Danger Room. Love all the detail on the sole of his boot there, the grips, everything. Really good stuff, and a use of a color hold as well. It's time for the New Mutants workout, says Cable. This has to be Jim Lee's first drawing of Cable. Does a good job with him. So could everyone else please vacate the premises now? So the New Mutants there in particular, Boom Boom, delighted with Cable laying down the law. Nice top-down angle here of him walking towards Banshee and the other X-Men. My people know their responsibilities, Banshee, he says. They don't need any Mickey Mouse schedules. Good for them, responds Banshee. And that may work fine when you're here on your own, Cable, but now the X-Men are back in residence. You've others to consider. And I like the characterization here by Claremont. So you've got the oldest males in effect facing off against each other, and Banshee is standing up to and taking on Cable in a very polite but firm manner. At this point, just looking again at that beautiful anchor image there of Cable kicking in the door, I realized that I skipped over the credits, which were over here on the very first page. So Chris Claremont as ever writer, Jim Lee penciler, Art Thibert, and Scott Williams inkers. So it looks to me like Thibert is inking the first half of the book. So very distinctive way that he inks in the arm hairs on Cable's shoulder there, different from the way that Scott Williams does it. You'll see that difference on the last page. So Thibert taking the first half of the book and Scott Williams the second half. Task Force X again on letters. So that was the same with issue 269. So Tom Orzechowski not lettering the whole book at all. Glynis Oliver, colorist. So continuing with the story and this face-off between X-Men and New Mutants. Storm says, Richter says, hey, X-Factor's got a ship the size of Manhattan Island. Why not use their facilities instead of hogging ours? And Storm retorts, this is our home too, Richter. And Jean adds, since long before you kids came along. And Cable says to Banshee there, a nice way of showing it, Red. Letting the place get blown to bits. Or rather, he's replying to her, but in the art, it looks like there's something of a bit more of a beef there between Cable and Banshee. It's happened before. We'll rebuild again. And that's something that you would see a little bit in this era where Jim Lee is interpreting quite loosely Chris Claremont's plots, and he is, in some cases, amplifying action, where Claremont is looking for more subtle interactions among the dramatis personae, let's say. So Jim Lee doing some solo runs from this point on in the collaboration, here and there, not everywhere, but here and there. So more bickering here, and I like the way that Banshee tightens up his collar there. He does up his collar. That's nice storytelling in the art. And he's asking Cable here, what do you mean, Cable, by my people? So that was something that Cable said earlier about the schedules. And so Banshee's quizzing him on that pronoun. And Cable's response is, it's like this, Irish. Someone had to look after these kids, and none of you hotshots were around or willing to take the job. Any objections? So Storm steps forward and says, both your points are well taken. Cable, you will have to accept that the New Mutants are a part of a greater whole, and like it or not, these facilities must be shared. Just as we, Banshee, must concede Cable's place as the New Mutants leader. We may not like his style, but we cannot deny what he's accomplished. We're done here, Cable. The danger room is yours. This is a great final panel where we've got in the foreground, that close-up on Forge's boots, and as the implication of space and distance, looking all the way back to Cable and the trio of New Mutants. It's a really nice idea of Lee's, to use perspective in this fashion. Everyone's standing on the same horizon line, but the figures are getting smaller, implying the distance from our point of view here at the front. It's a nice little device and something any artist should think about using in their own work. So let's continue. Then we have a little interlude, and the location is Malibu, California, Lila Cheney's beachfront house. So last seen in issue 261 of the title, which focused on Dazzler. And here we've got Lila Cheney's bodyguard, and that is Guido here. And Guido is like, his speech pattern is that of a what would I say, like a New Jersey Italian type. So that comes out in the way that Claremont writes his dialogue. What's the matter, he says to Stanacek here, who last featured in issue 261. Don't you understand plain English? She's gone, split, vamoosed, hit the road. The lady wanted her itinerary made public. She would have left wide. I like that. Since she did not, she must obviously prefer solitude, am I right? So Stanacek here Don't believe you, man. I demand to see her for myself. Not a chance. She can't do this, especially to me. Her movie's top of the charts. She can't walk out of that kind of success. After all the work put into the project, she owes me. So that was Star 90, the Dazzler movie from issue 261. And so a little pickup in relation to that, and getting Stanacek out of the picture here. Comic couple of panels here with Guido flicking him into the Porsche, and then picking it up and putting him, out on the road to drive off. He says, Italian suits, Italian cars, major production deals up the wazoo, sitting in the catbird seat, my man. Most would be satisfied with a fraction of that, but no, you gotta have yourself a trophy, babe. So he's protecting Dazzler, but we don't see Dazzler in this. So Stanacek is out on the road, he's heading off, and then there's a big light flash out back of Lila Cheney's beachfront house. And who is it except for Lila Cheney herself? And we saw her escape a strike team on the fringes of Shi'ar space in the previous issue, 269. And this is where she's teleported to. She's teleported home. And her message here is terrible danger. Professor Charles Xavier, help, desperate need, X-Men. And it is intriguing, just the words that she uses there in terms of the big revelations upcoming in issues 275, 76, and 77 regarding Professor X. Then the scene switches to Harry's hideaway on the fringes of Salem Center, just down Grey Malkin Lane from Xavier's school. So Harry's hideaway, usually only ever seen in Claremont's backups to classic X-Men. And here we've got these two old friends, Storm and Jean Grey, catching up and going over all of the bizarre changes that have taken place in their life and reminiscing on old times too. So Storm kicks off, remember how deftly Wolverine maneuvered you under Harry's mistletoe? And Jean says, that little terror can kiss, I'll give him that. Verily, the best he is at what he does, says Storm in reply. And then some. The Saturday after, Scott and I went to the Rainbow Room and the Sentinels came for us. That's reference back to Uncanny X-Men 99. And Jean continues and says, and in hardly any time at all, there I was at the controls of the Star Corps space shuttle, single-handedly trying to save the X-Men by getting us back to Earth before a solar flare fried me to a crisp. And you succeeded, says Storm. So I'm told. I thought I died. That's the problem. So a reference back to Uncanny X-Men 101 and the divergence between original Jean Grey and the Phoenix Force that masqueraded as Jean Grey until issue 137. So Jean says, for me those moments seem like yesterday. I blacked out in space. I woke in the Baxter building. So that's a reference to Fantastic Four, John Byrne's Fantastic Four number 286. Ages later, my whole world turned upside down, the modern equivalent of Rip Van Winkle, to learn about Phoenix and Madeline Pryor and how those two individuals were really just extensions of my own being. And like the real kind of final revelations regarding all of that concerning Madeline Pryor go back to Inferno, the last big event to run through the three major X titles of Uncanny, New Mutants, and X Factor. So Jean continues and says, I tell you, Aurora, the harder we try to untangle the mess, the tighter it seems I'm tied to it. So really Jean Grey's continuity, character history at this point, very, very complicated. And so, that's the point she's making there. But this is a kind of like a self-deprecating joke from Chris Claremont that comes in the next speech balloon here. But listen to me, natter, natter, natter. The way I'm running on, you think I was being paid by the word, because that was the joke that was made at Claremont's expense at the time, that he was paid by the word. And you can see all the words on these pages in particular. But it's all great in terms of the characterization that we get of these, of Storm and Jean, and their long history together, their friendship, but they haven't really seen each other They saw each other briefly during Inferno, but not since then. And so, you know, the focus turns to Storm. It's not as though I'm the only one trying to cope with some major changes, says Jean, stifling a laugh. How's it feel having the wonder years to live all over again? And Storm says, I've undergone so many tests since my return. Unfortunately, the results appear less and less hopeful. And this is really interesting. I'm of an age where the body changes rapidly, yet there are none Forge can record. I may be like Peter Pan, the eternal child. So it's interesting how maybe that would have been a bit of continuity for Storm for some further length of time, but it gets changed by the end of X-Tinction Agenda. And then there's a little confusion here in terms of where the tales are going for those speech balloons. This is Jean speaking here. Ain't we the pair? Me with too many lives for one body, you with not enough body for your life. Muddling through regardless, says Storm. And you see Jim Lee has reversed the angle on them here so that we can look out the window and we see that van parked outside, and the van is filled with Genoshan magistrates, including a very familiar looking face here for long-time readers of the X-Men. It's Havok. And Havok came out the other side of the Siege Perilous, similarly amnesiac, and joined up with the Genoshans to put his powers in the service of that racist, exploitative regime. So the driver of the van says positive identification on one prime target, Jean Grey, aka Marvel Girl. Initial affiliation X-Men, currently X-Factor. The other superficially resembles Storm, but the age is all wrong. Daughter maybe or younger sister? Havok says, no record of any. Doesn't matter. If she's one of Xavier's students, that makes her fair game. So that's seeding up the action when it comes later in the issue. And then Storm and Jean walk back from Harry's to the grounds of the X-Mansion. Really nice art on this page as well. Jim Lee really selling the autumn background to what's going on in these panels. And Jean again thinking back to the beginnings. Thing is, Professor Xavier, Moira MacTaggert and Professor Xavier. So she's thinking about, you know, the origins of everything. He didn't found the X-Men in order to fulfill the family graveyard. I wonder if he'd known the price of his dream. And Storm says, we know that price, yet we always keep coming back for more. And this is interesting. I like this little revelation. Like Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, says Jean, the professor's favourite book, The Once and Future King. But he always saw himself as Merlin, showing the way. And Storm asks, have you ever wondered then who represents King Arthur? Like him, we cannot forever use our teacher as a crutch. Miss him, yes, but we have to fly by ourselves and learn to take the consequences, good or ill, of our actions. So easily said, says Jean. I missed you too, Aurora. I'm glad you're not dead, and I you. Farewell, but look who's watching from the bushes. Before I get to that, like what Storm says there about missing Professor X but having to fly by themselves, that was always Claremont's big goal for the X-Men, that they would move beyond being students, that the professor would take a back seat, that the days of Stanley and Jack Kirby's Professor X as principal and teacher would fade into the background, and the X-Men would stand on their own 2 feet, and maybe even some of the older ones retire to happy ever afters in some cases. That's what Storm is saying there. And this is still the point at which Claremont is planning to kill Professor X off in issue number 300. That is his plan at this point. So, look, here's Rain watching from the bushes, and she is sarcastic about the friendship and the hugs between Storm and Jean. I'm so glad you're alive, she mocks. How nice for you. Pity some others were not quite so lucky. That's a nice transformation, DeLuca effect there in Jim Lee's art for Rain. That is not fair, Rain replies. Storm: "No, it's not," says Rain, "any more than was the bullet that took poor Doug Ramsey's life." So that's really at the bottom of Rain's, at the bottom of her anger. And so here we get to the point, again, reflecting on the death of X-Men. So Storm brings up Thunderbird dying on the X-Men's first mission, and also how she thought that Jean had died, with the events of issue 101 when she was piloting that space shuttle into in its crash landing. And so at the time in Dallas when we faced the adversary, did all the X-Men. But you got better, because they did die, but Roma brought them back. But you got better, says Rain. What makes you X-Men so special and not Doug? So Rain heads off crying into the woods, and Boom Boom witnesses it. And who else is out there down by the lake? It's Stevie Hunter as well. And Stevie says to Storm, "No one ever said it was easy. I messed up, Stevie," says Storm. "I thought hiding in the shadows, letting the world believe the X-Men were dead, would give us an edge." So that's a reference to the Outback era, and to Storm taking up Roma's offer to cast the spell that would keep them invisible to any kind of electronic scanners or detection. They could never be filmed, so there'd be no evidence that they were still alive and had survived the encounter with the adversary in Uncanny X-Men 227. And Storm continues: "Protect our friends and loved ones while enabling us to strike more freely at our foes. Instead, we've deeply hurt those we care for most." And Stevie says, "Not every idea is a winner, Aurora." That's a good point. It's a fair point. And Storm says, "Nor every person who takes on the role of leader qualified." So Storm wondering whether she should continue as leader of the X-Men, given those poor decisions, as she sees it, that she made in the past. "That too, you figuring on stepping aside?" asked Stevie. So the conversation could continue. More reflection, more rumination, more pondering, more questioning. But no, it's interrupted. An alarm goes off. Or rather that Warlock sounds the alarm, and there's an attack. And here we go. So we get this great anchor image of these vehicles that Jim Lee's designed for the Genoshan Magistrates and Strike Team. And we're going to see how they operate shortly. And Boom Boom asks the operative question: "Who are these guys?" And Warlock's answer isn't too helpful, except that he says that they're operating ultra-performance wheeled ground assault vehicles. "Worry about the details later," says Stevie. She's grabbed Storm. "We can't face them in the open. Get under cover." So she's taking charge while it seems like Storm's been knocked out by the initial attack. And here we get to see how these vehicles operate. So Stevie shouts, "Head for the woods. They can't follow us there." Nice 3-panel sequence where we see one of these vehicles drop these legs, these mechanical legs, and hoist itself off the ground. So it's able to follow them into the woods and blasting away with those nose-mounted machine guns as well. Looks pretty deadly. There's Rain. She's out in the woods still. That's a great panel by Jim Lee. Really great stuff. So inside the X-Mansion, the X-Men and Cable hear the alarm sounding. "Someone's attacking the kids on the surface," says Forge. We switch back. This is a deep piece of continuity here regarding Stevie Hunter. So her knee goes out. Of all the lousy stinking times for it to give out, and the knee injury is the reason that she never could continue her career as a dancer and had to become a teacher. So that's an old piece of continuity regarding Stevie, and Claremont hasn't forgotten it and uses it in the story here. But at least we reached the hatch. So we've got this nice panel of Banshee, or rather Forge grabbing a gun, Cable 2. Forge says situation scan indicates only a small force. Those creeps may have gotten in the opening salvos, Irish, says Cable, well, my kids are getting things back under control, because Cable has been teaching and training the New Mutants to be more aggressive in the use of their powers. So we see that here, in particular with Boom Boom, and she's making progress against those vehicles, and Richter too. So he generates a localized earthquake that takes out one of the vehicles, and but yeah, Boom Boom scratches the other with her time bombs. So there's a third one though, and that's coming after Storm and Stevie. So Storm pushes Stevie down into the hatch, or she helps her down into the hatch, and they're talking there about how they're Genoshan, and Stevie's aghast operating on United States soil. They wouldn't dare, but Storm says they've done it before, and they have. In issue 259 in particular, New Mutants, we must withdraw below ground at once. Why bother? We've pretty much won, says Boom Boom. Besides, we don't take orders from the X-Men. And now, here the tide of the battle turns. So this magistrate, Richter's got her by the lapels, but she hits some button on her wristwatch, and she says to him, fatal mistake, Jean joke. Should have scampered while you had the chance. So let's turn the page, and a great double page half spread here from Jim Lee. More designs by him, these big chunky battle suits he's designed for the Genoshan strike team. And now they know they're in trouble because the Genoshan says to them, we're just the Pathfinders, establishing and securing a landing locus so Pipeline can transmit the rest of our strike force. So now Storm pushes Stevie down the hatch and goes to help the children and scrambles the lock behind her. So Cable catches Stevie, but he was just short of being able to issue from the hatch himself. And then Storm recognizes the third operator of one of these vehicles, and it's Havok, merciful lady, she exclaims, the third biker, using some form of self-generated energy plasma to blast his way through. It's impossible, how can it be? But I know that power signature. She recognizes it to be Havok. But we've got a page now of the X-Men getting organized. There's a great use of a screen tone there for the shadows. Great top-down angle on the figures there as well. Banshee tells Stevie to contact X-Factor, that they need their help immediately. And now Banshee and Cable are aloft, Cannonball blasting too, carrying forward. So these heavy hitters are making their way to the surface via the lake. They're going to exit via the lake. That's the fastest route. Great anchor image here of them moving at speed. Out on the surface, Boom Boom still holding her own, but then Storm intervenes and takes over a couple of her time bombs to send them towards Havok, blast him off his vehicle. She pulls his helmet off and recognizes him and asks, but how could an X-Man come to willingly serve our deadliest enemies? What have those fiends done to him? So Boom Boom's distracted by Storm commandeering her time bombs, and when she's distracted, this particular Genoshan flyer sneaks up behind her and grabs her and Richter both, who was trying to push her free, in a catch web, which also has the power of being able to stun them as well. It must be like a taser too. So Storm's picked up a rifle, she's blasting away, gives Warlock an order to grab the Sky Cycle and drain its power pack to bring it down. And Warlock gets the order, but too late. He's targeted with this particular bolt that sits in the side of his head there, and he is going to be teleported away, as we'll see on the next page. So we've got a fairly frenetic wrap up here on the last page. There he is. Rain thinks that he's been killed, but Storm says, not so, Wolfsbane, stay by me. They merely teleported him to their homeland. And then Storm is caught with one of those catch webs as well. So the Genoshans are celebrating their victory, but Havok here has something of a conscience. he says to his colleague, "Doesn't sit well with me, Tam, attacking kids." And she responds, "Orders are orders, Alex." So the status is the prisoners are secure, the location's secure, minimal casualties for the Genossians. But one of them says here, "But the longer we stay, the greater the probability of the muties gathering reinforcements and this scrap turning real messy. We got what we came for, best be satisfied with that." So they teleport or transmat away, and Forge, Cable, Banshee, Cannonball, they emerge from the lake too late. Forge scans and finds residual elements indicating a transporter effect. Cable says, "No blood, no bodies, theirs or ours, only the kids' clothes." And that was the patch from Storm's jacket. And Cable at the end, great image of him here, great upshot on his face and the double lighting too. "I don't know who did this Indian yet," he says, "but when I find out, you got my word, the people responsible are going to wish they'd never been born." So proper tough guy dialogue from Cable to conclude the issue. Next, part 2 of the X-Tinction Agenda follows in New Mutants 95. And in 30 days in the X-Men, it's Wolvie's turn. And that is an amazing issue, 271. So here is a little guide to the various parts and order of the parts of the X-Tinction Agenda. I think this little spot illustration of the New Mutants is by Jim Lee. I think it's penciled and inked by him. And the letters page has to do with issue 262 and 263 here. And this is about signings, artist signings, including Todd McFarlane signing there in Charlottesville, Virginia. So there you go. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on part 1 of X-Tinction Agenda, Uncanny X-Men 270. Let me know your thoughts about this particular crossover event, the 1990 autumn crossover event. And if you enjoyed my review and commentary, please like the video. It really does help the channel. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.